Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, we're now closing in on a month since the release of the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion. It's crazy how time flies by, and with that, a lot of people are looking towards repeat playthroughs of the game, and even playing through the regular base game with the DLC weapons, doing things like entering New Game Plus after finishing the DLC, just to see how it treats the base game as well. And with that in mind, sometimes you want the most brokenly powerful stuff to do that, other times you just want stuff that is pretty good but extremely fun to actually use, rather than just, things that instantly delete everything. Today is going to be about a number of those types of weapons from the DLC, ones that are generally underrated or just not talked about all that often simply because they aren't the brokenly overpowered ones, but they are just a slight step below that. And sometimes the specific reason that they are powerful is just also not very widely known. With that said, starting off today, let's talk about the Bonny Butchering Knife. This is a new great axe in the DLC, a unique weapon version of the regular butchering knife from the base game, sharing the same bonus effect of giving you 1% of your maximum life as healing every time that you hit an enemy with the weapon. But unlike the base game version of the weapon, this one has a unique weapon skill, Hone Blade. This increases the damage that the weapon deals, but also makes it heal you for an extra 1% maximum health every time that you hit an enemy while it's active, basically just doubling the healing of the weapon. But there's a sort of hidden bonus effect of this that you would never notice unless you actually play around with the weapon for at least a couple of minutes properly, and this might be a bug, it might not, but when you hit enemies with the weapon while the skill is inactive, well, it's not active. It stores the healing that you do, and then it releases it onto you in a burst when you activate the weapon skill. The amount of healing that you get when using the skill depends on how many times that you have hit enemies with the skill inactive, being directly 1% maximum health per hit that you did. So if you do 20 hits while the weapon is not active, then activate the skill, you will then heal for 20% health on the spot. And that is on top of already decent weapon scaling as well, making this thing honestly pretty unique. You get this in the Bonny village, specifically sitting right here on your map, just beside the sort of ravine that goes through the village in this little shack. Second, then we have a sort of dual entry, which are the Messmer Soldier Great Spear and the Messmer Soldier Axe. Both of these have unique heavy attack interactions that you wouldn't really know without playing around with their movesets. Both of these are infusible weapons, so any Ash of War that you want that applies to their weapon class as well, and the Axe has the same heavy attack moveset as the Warped Axe from the base game, which is honestly a relatively strong one, but also has a bonus effect of increasing the damage of charged heavy attacks from the weapon by 10%, which makes it even better than you might think. The spear is instead having its own unique charged heavy that matches the Tree Spear from the base game, which is a really powerful double stab on both parts of the combo. But unlike that weapon, it also is actually infusible with Ashes of War, which lets you focus even harder on the power of this attack in general. Both of these weapons are random drops from the Messmer soldiers that wield them, and both of these are surprisingly good for the fact that they drop from these little guy soldiers. The axe you'll probably honestly just get pretty passively. There are a lot of enemies that will drop this, and there's a few of them to farm near the castle front site of Grace. The spear is a little bit tougher, but there are 3 soldiers that wield this in the little camp right here, southwest of the Moorth Ruins site of Grace. Avoid the patrolling mounted Black Knights as well, and then just kill the soldiers, teleport to the Grace to reset this, and then repeat until it drops. Third up is the Carian Sorcery Sword. This has been one of the most intriguing weapons to me since the release of the DLC, but it also was bugged at release. What makes this thrusting sword special then is that it also functions as a catalyst for casting sorceries instead of having to use a staff. Specifically, when it's held in your right hand, your heavy attack button is replaced with a spellcasting function, and when held in the left hand, it is instead your Ash of War button. At the initial release, the sorcery scaling of this was so completely trash that it just wasn't really worth using in the first place at all, but this was fixed in a recent patch, and now it is actually one of the higher sorcery scaling items in the game, around the midpoint of intelligence, specifically being in the top 3 right until 40 intelligence, where it's right at the top, then it starts trailing off once you get higher than that. That means that this excels specifically in builds that use magic and then build int, but don't rely on it as their main function. Things like if you want to use this with a second thrusting sword, have the power stance moveset but also be able to cast, or an arguably better combo is to use it behind a shield, which gives you the shield poke mechanic to attack from safety, but also this lets you cast with the same weapon without having to switch off at all, making it just a really comfortable way to play too. Not to mention that this actually has S scaling with intelligence at max upgrades and does a ton of magic damage on the weapon hits themselves if you have good int. This one then comes from Castle Ensis, but specifically only if you drop in from above above in the Shadow Altus region. From the High Road Cross site of Grace, head west into the little shallow water patch here, then follow it back towards the castle. On your right, you can drop down to the top of the battlements and follow this around to the chest that is right here, inside of which you will find the sword itself. Fourth up then is the Gazing Finger Colossal Weapon. This is a boss weapon, which means it is at least on most people's radar to begin with that it exists, but it is also an optional remembrance boss that drops this and it's pretty missable. And it works in such a strange way that honestly most people won't realize just how strong it is, even if they do get it for themselves. The weapon skill has a ton of hyper armor on it that lets you trade with it. The weapon hit and the ground blast part of it are two separate hits that can both hit the same enemy, but while the weapon itself mostly scales with strength and a little bit of intelligence, the skill does holy damage that scales with your faith stat, so it is really just an unintuitive weapon to know how to build around. That said, if you get a bunch of strength to make the weapon hit strong, which is important because it also has a unique heavy attack combo that's actually pretty strong, and then you get a bunch of faith to boost the weapon skill further, stick on some holy damage boosters and the like that, then it starts hitting like an actual truck while also fully flinging any humanoid enemies into the air, making it incredible for things like the NPC brawl near the end of the DLC, or for things like PvP. On which note, fifth, we have the Madding Hand. This is the new Madness build-up fist weapon pair, and while in PvE they aren't really any better than any other pair of fist weapons, as Madness has minimal applications there, against human players, this thing is just awesome. The weapon skill pretty much just instantly applies Madness if it hits, so you can trade into people with this to stun them out of their attack, and then you get the damage chunk and also a bit of small time to beat them up while they are stunned. And even past that, the general weapon moveset is so quick due to them being fist weapons that they just build up Madness incredibly quickly. And then again, you can capitalize during the stun. In PvE, these things are sort of whatever, outside of, Madness buff cycling before a fight, things like that. But in PvP, these things are incredibly fun and potent. To get them for yourself, this is simply a drop from the Madding Hand enemy NPC that comes in right at this spot as you are entering the Abyssal Woods region. Sixth then is the Anvil Hammer. This thing looks absolutely badass, and it is one of the earlier weapons you can find that looks this cool. It has a pretty solid unique skill on it, reasonably high levels of hyper armor on it to trade through hits, good damage and some AoE on it. Honestly, it's basically a reskinned Eruption without the magma, but the real kicker for this weapon is just the way that it scales. It scales reasonably well with multiple stats to the point that this thing just gets stronger than most any weapon if you are someone who is multiple New Game Pluses in, walking around at like level 400 just for fun or something, because every damage stat in the game fuels this weapon's damage at least a little bit. This has less of an effect for people that are sticking around level 150, but for those who just keep leveling and leveling and leveling, this weapon will eventually actually scale up better than most. To get it for yourself then, it is in the first Ruined Forge dungeon in the Gravesite Plains, and it is simply the reward for actually finishing the dungeon. Seventh and lastly then, let's talk about the Swift Spear. This is super easy to get quite early on. It is literally just sitting a few steps off of the main road going southeast from the castle front side of Grace, and it's pretty unassuming at first glance. Even reading the weapon description would be a little bit misleading, because this thing has an incredibly unique moveset. Specifically, its light attacks hit multiple times. The first input is 2 stabs. The second input is 3 stabs, all really quickly. And so the idea is that over the course of a combo, you can just build up things like successive hit bonus talismans just so much faster than any other spear. Pair that with things like a powerful weapon buff, the new Messmer Flame Ashes of War, Spear Talisman, Two-Handed Talisman. There's just a lot of ways that you can actually boost this weapon's light attack combo more than anything else in its class. It doesn't reach quite broken levels of weapons, but it hits some really nasty numbers on its light attack, and it's honestly a pretty unique way to play too if it's something that you're into. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A nice little collection of weapons that I think are underutilized and generally just assumed by most people to not be very good because people don't talk about them enough, despite them actually being quite strong if you put some effort into building around them. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and maybe even found something that you want to play around with yourself. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.